Ayanna Brooks was a bright 17-year-old with dreams of becoming a lawyer. Sheriff Mark Ellis was a respected lawman twice her age, with power, influence, and a secret he'd kill to protect. When their worlds collided, it set off a chain of lies, betrayal, and violence that would expose the darkest truth hiding behind Willow Ridge's badge of honor, and nearly cost Ayanna her life. In the quiet town of Willow Ridge, population just under 10,000, everybody knew everybody, or at least they thought they did. It was the kind of place where doors were left unlocked, where Sunday morning church was non-negotiable, and where the sheriff was more than just a law enforcement figure. He was the community's moral compass. Sheriff Mark Ellis had served the town for over 2 decades. With his neatly trimmed gray mustache, crisp uniform, and reassuring presence, he was a symbol of order, trust, and tradition. People respected him. They trusted him. He was the face of safety in a place that prided itself on having little to fear. Ayanna Brooks was a bright 17-year-old high school senior with dreams of studying criminal justice. She was one of the few black students at Willow Ridge High, but she never let that define her. She was sharp, polite, and known for her work ethic. Through a community mentorship program, she landed a part-time position at the sheriff's office, a big opportunity in a town with few. To her family, it was a sign that Ayanna was going places. To Ayanna, it was a stepping stone. But for Sheriff Ellis, it was an opening. What began as casual conversation between a lawman and a student slowly crossed lines that should have never been approached. Sheriff Ellis would praise her maturity, tell her she was special, and find reasons to keep her in the office longer than required. He'd offer to drive her home when it got late, saying he didn't want her walking alone. At first, Ayanna felt flattered. She assumed the sheriff saw something in her, potential, promise, maybe even a father figure. But then the compliments turned suggestive. His hands would linger a moment too long. He began texting her late at night. When she tried to pull away, he reminded her of how powerful he was in the town. She didn't want to believe the worst about him, but something inside her began to ache with fear. Eventually, things escalated. What should have been a safe environment became one filled with dread. Afraid of ruining her future and not being believed, Ayanna kept the encounters secret. Her grades slipped, her smile faded, and she started missing school. Her mother, Marlene, grew concerned, but Ayanna brushed it off as stress. The turning point came one afternoon when Ayanna realized she had missed her period. Then another. A test confirmed what she had feared. She was pregnant. She was only 17. And the baby belonged to the most powerful man in town. She panicked. Sheriff Ellis reacted coldly when she told him. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't talk about support. He only focused on one thing, keeping it quiet. He warned her that if she spoke out, nobody would believe her. He said she could ruin her life, her mother's life, and the life of the unborn child. He said the town would turn against her. He made it clear that her silence was expected. Ayanna tried to believe she could handle it alone, but the emotional weight was too heavy. Eventually she broke down and confided in her best friend, a girl named Kelsey, who encouraged her to go to a counselor, or at least speak to someone outside the town. Ayanna was hesitant but agreed to think about it. That was the first and only time she told anyone. She had no idea that this one act of courage, speaking the truth, would set off a chain reaction far beyond anything she could have imagined. Days later, Ayanna was gone. The news of Ayanna Brooks' disappearance swept through Willow Ridge like a passing wind, noticed but not deeply felt. For those outside her immediate circle, it was just another teenager gone missing. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she was overwhelmed. That's what the official report suggested anyway. Sheriff Ellis stood before the cameras at a brief press conference, urging calm. He stated that Ayanna had likely left of her own accord and assured everyone the department was doing everything they could to locate her. His voice was steady, his expression composed, but his words lacked urgency. And no one dared to question him. Ayanna's mother, Marlene, wasn't satisfied. Her daughter wouldn't run away. She knew it in her bones. Ayanna had dreams, goals, a part-time job, and a life she was building step by step. Something was wrong. But every time Marlene pushed for answers, she hit a wall. The deputies seemed uninterested. The case was moved slowly through paperwork. Leads weren't followed. Friends weren't properly questioned. The town's tight-knit and deeply loyal culture worked against her. People whispered but didn't speak aloud. Nobody wanted to point fingers at the sheriff. After all, he was the same man who had spoken at high school graduations and fundraisers. He had been there for every ribbon cutting, every funeral, every tragedy. In Willow Ridge, Sheriff Ellis was above suspicion. But that illusion started to crack when a local farmer made an unexpected call. He had seen something unusual. A county patrol vehicle parked on the edge of his property late one night with its headlights off. He didn't see who got out or what they were doing, but he remembered the odd timing and how quickly the vehicle sped away when he approached. That night just happened to be 2 days before Ayanna disappeared. He shared this with a young reporter, Nicole Rivera, who had started to pay close attention to the missing girl's case. Nicole was new to the town but already felt something wasn't right. There was a stiffness, an uneasiness in the way local officials avoided the topic. Something was being hidden. Nicole began digging quietly. Using public records, she checked GPS logs tied to Sheriff's Department vehicles. What she found stunned her. The GPS data showed that Sheriff Ellis's assigned vehicle had in fact been parked exactly where the farmer said, at the edge of those remote fields, during the early hours of the morning. That was enough to raise red flags. Nicole tried to contact the Sheriff's Department for clarification, but her calls were ignored. She approached the mayor's office. Nothing. Instead, she began receiving anonymous emails warning her to drop the story. One even included a thinly veiled threat reminding her she was new here and should respect the people who built this town. Still, Nicole pressed on. She reached out to Ayanna's friends, carefully and off-record. One of them confirmed what Ayanna had shared shortly before she disappeared, that she was pregnant and the baby's father was Sheriff Ellis. The weight of that information was enormous. If true, it meant the town's highest-ranking officer had abused a minor and now, possibly, covered up her disappearance. But proving it would be nearly impossible. The sheriff had allies in every office, in every church pew, in every town hall seat. Days turned into a week, then 2. There was no sign of Ayanna, no phone calls, no texts, no sightings. Her social media remained silent. Then, something strange happened. The Sheriff's Department announced they were scaling back the search. Officially, there were no leads to follow. Unofficially, it was clear that they were burying the story. Nicole, however, had already started to collect pieces the town didn't want assembled. GPS logs, witness statements, and reports of previous young girls who had briefly worked in the department only to leave under vague circumstances. It was becoming a pattern, one that no one had ever noticed or had dared to admit. As the days stretched on and the official investigation slowed to a crawl, it was clear something far darker was lurking beneath the surface of Willow Ridge, something that wasn't just about a missing girl, but about power, secrets, and the terrifying things people were willing to ignore to protect the illusion of peace. 2 weeks after Ayanna Brooks vanished, a body was found in the dense woods outside of town, just beyond the county line. It was a hunter who stumbled upon the remains, hidden beneath a pile of leaves and branches. The corpse was badly burned, almost unrecognizable, with clothing charred and skin disfigured by fire. The news rattled the community. Though authorities hesitated to confirm an identity, whispers spread quickly. People assumed it was Ayanna. The Sheriff's Department moved swiftly. Within hours of the discovery, a statement was released suggesting that the body was likely that of the missing teen, and the tone was definitive. Officials hinted at suicide, implying that Ayanna had been troubled and overwhelmed, and that this was a tragic end to a sad story. But the facts didn't quite match the story being told. The autopsy report, obtained days later through an anonymous leak, revealed something shocking. The victim was not pregnant. Not only that, but the estimated height and weight did not perfectly align with Ayanna's. While the state medical examiner was cautious in ruling out identification without DNA results, questions started bubbling beneath the surface. If the body wasn't Ayanna, then who was it? And where was Ayanna? That same week, Nicole Rivera received an envelope slid under the door of her apartment. No return address, no note, just a flash drive inside. On it was grainy security footage from a rural gas station dated the same night Ayanna disappeared. The video showed a young girl, who looked just like Ayanna, clearly frightened, standing near the back of the store. She wasn't alone. A man in a sheriff's department uniform was with her, and although the footage was low resolution, the body language was telling. She flinched when he reached toward her. He looked over his shoulder constantly. They disappeared from view minutes later. Nicole uploaded the footage online with a brief article outlining the inconsistencies in the official story. It spread quickly. Local social media erupted with speculation. People who had been silent began to speak in private messages, emails, and anonymous tips. One former employee of the sheriff's office mentioned being pushed out years ago after questioning how Ellis interacted with young female interns. Another mentioned hearing rumors about hush money paid to families whose daughters left town unexpectedly. The sheriff denied everything. He went on the record to say the video was misleading and the online reaction was hysterical. But he couldn't explain why his department car had been in multiple off-the-grid locations the night Ayanna went missing, nor could he explain why the search for her had been so limited, so dismissive. State officials began to get involved, pushed by public pressure. The case had grown too big to contain. Investigators began looking into Ellis's past and demanding access to internal records. The sheriff's usual allies started to distance themselves quietly. His calm exterior began to fracture. The tide turned when a small group of volunteer searchers found something the police had missed or ignored. Deep in a ravine near the same field where the patrol car had once been spotted, they discovered remnants of a burnt backpack. Inside was a cracked cell phone, still partially intact. Forensics recovered fragments of text messages, conversations between Ayanna and someone labeled M.E. The texts painted a grim picture. Ayanna saying she was scared, that she wanted to tell someone, that she couldn't live with the secret anymore. The responses were colder. They warned her not to make a mistake. They said things like, "Think about what happens if this gets out." By now it was clear that the narrative Willowridge had been sold was falling apart. Ayanna hadn't run away. She hadn't taken her own life. She had tried to speak the truth, and something terrible happened when she did. The burned body in the woods was not the end of the story. It was just another piece of a puzzle that pointed toward a calculated cover-up, and a powerful man willing to do anything to keep his crimes hidden. As state investigators dug deeper into the case, the carefully constructed image of Sheriff Mark Ellis began to unravel. With public attention now fixed on Willowridge, the town that had once looked the other way was being forced to confront the truth. What had started as whispers and suspicions was now snowballing into undeniable evidence of corruption, abuse, and violence. The discovery of Ayanna's burnt backpack and phone led authorities to search more thoroughly through places previously ignored, especially those tied personally to Ellis. One of them was his private hunting cabin, a secluded structure deep in the woods where he often claimed to go for peace and quiet. The search team, accompanied by forensic experts, scoured the property inch by inch. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard, they found a blood-stained notebook. It was Ayanna's journal. The entries were dated, personal, and painfully clear. She had written about the sheriff's manipulation, the fear she lived with every day, and how she regretted ever trusting him. There were pages describing late-night phone calls, uninvited visits, and repeated threats. She even detailed the day she found out she was pregnant and how Ellis reacted, not with concern but with cold panic. The last entries were the most disturbing. Ayanna had written that she planned to speak with someone outside the department, maybe even contact a lawyer or the press. She had become convinced that if she stayed silent, he'd keep control forever. But she also feared that if she spoke, he would find a way to silence her, permanently. The journal alone would have been damning, but what investigators found next removed any remaining doubt. Just outside the cabin, buried in a shallow grave behind an old shed, was another shocking discovery. Ayanna's original work ID, a set of broken eyeglasses, and a stained piece of her school uniform. Forensics confirmed the blood belonged to Ayanna. These weren't items someone misplaced. These were discarded pieces of evidence intentionally hidden. Meanwhile, digital forensic experts continued analyzing Ayanna's phone. They recovered fragments of deleted messages and location data that showed her phone had been near the hunting cabin the same night the sheriff's vehicle had been seen on the farmer's land. They also found a chilling audio recording. Short, muffled, but real. In it, Ayanna could be heard crying, her voice trembling. She said she was scared and didn't want to go out there. Another voice, deep and unmistakably male, told her she didn't have a choice. The story was no longer just about a missing girl. It was about a systematic abuse of power. The sheriff had used his badge to exploit, control, and threaten a teenager, and when he could no longer contain the fallout, he had tried to erase her. The case had reached national headlines. Civil rights groups began organizing protests outside the sheriff's office. Crowds gathered at the courthouse, holding photos of Ayanna and demanding justice. Then came the twist no one expected. Ayanna Brooks was found alive. A woman living in an abandoned house near the edge of the county line called emergency services after discovering a weak and disoriented girl hiding in her basement. Ayanna had been there for days, too scared to leave, too traumatized to ask for help. Her body was bruised, her face thin and pale, but she was breathing. She had crawled away from an attack that night, injured, terrified, and convinced she wouldn't survive if anyone knew she was still alive. She had kept hidden, moving only when necessary, surviving off scraps and rainwater. When investigators arrived and confirmed her identity, it was as if the entire town stopped breathing. The girl they had been told was dead, the one whose memory was being mourned under false pretenses, had survived a calculated attempt to erase her. Her story, once whispered and dismissed, had now become the very foundation of a case that would shake Willow Ridge to its core. The lies were finished. The truth, once buried, had risen. The return of Ayanna Brooks shattered whatever fragile illusion of innocence remained in Willow Ridge. Her survival was more than a miracle. It was proof. Proof that a girl everyone had written off, dismissed, or silenced had lived to expose the powerful man who tried to destroy her. The hospital where she was taken became the most secure place in the county, with law enforcement stationed at every entrance, not to protect the town from her, but to protect her from the town. Even as she lay recovering, thin, dehydrated, and weak, the media circled like vultures outside the building. But Ayanna didn't want the spotlight. She wanted justice. Her full statement was taken days later in a closed room with her attorney, state officials, and trauma specialists present. Through trembling hands and tears, she recounted everything: the manipulation, the abuse, the pregnancy, the threats. She explained how Sheriff Ellis had lured her to a remote area under the pretense of talking things through. He told her he had a solution to their problem, but when she got in the vehicle, something felt wrong. They drove far into the woods, where he became aggressive, accusing her of betraying him, of ruining his life. When she tried to leave, he attacked. She lost consciousness after being struck. When she woke, she was alone and bleeding. Somehow, through sheer instinct and terror, she dragged herself through the trees and escaped into the night. She avoided roads, fearful he might still be looking for her. Eventually, she found the abandoned house on the edge of the next county, where she stayed hidden for days. Her strength ebbed, but her will to survive kept her alive. When a local woman discovered her, Ayanna barely had enough strength to speak. But she didn't need to say much. Her face had been on the news for weeks. With Ayanna's testimony, the journal, the forensic evidence, and the recovered messages, the case against Sheriff Mark Ellis became airtight. He was arrested while standing on the front porch of his home, hands raised, still wearing the badge that once protected him. No struggle, no protest. Just silence. For once, he had no control over the story. His mugshot, cold, pale, and full of defeat, was broadcast nationwide. He was charged with multiple counts: statutory rape, attempted murder, unlawful imprisonment, abuse of power, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom was packed from wall to wall when the trial began. Ayanna chose to testify in person, standing in front of the man who once held her life in his hands. Her voice cracked at times, but she never stopped. Every word she spoke was a strike against the wall of silence that had protected him for decades. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before delivering their verdict: guilty on all charges. Ellis showed no emotion. He didn't look at Ayanna. He didn't look at the jury. As the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the courtroom remained quiet. No cheers, no applause, just a heavy silence that came with knowing justice had finally been served. In the weeks that followed, the fallout continued. Several deputies resigned. The town council faced mounting pressure over past cover-ups. Civil suits were filed. The mentorship program at the sheriff's office was permanently shut down. But amid the wreckage, Ayanna began to heal. With the support of advocacy groups and counselors, she left Willowridge to start a new life in another state. She finished high school under protection, later enrolling in college to study criminal justice, the very field she once thought might be her future. Now it would be her path toward change. Her story didn't end with silence. It began again with survival. And though she had every reason to disappear, Ayanna later chose to speak publicly, not to relive the pain, but to make sure no other girl would ever suffer in silence under the protection of power. Her voice, once nearly taken from her, became the weapon that brought down the man who tried to end her life.